All right, we are live. Don, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon for me, evening for you.
Thank you, Jorge.
How you been?
I, I'm good. I don't have any view of chat, so I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'll go back to YouTube and fire up the.
Okay, are you on your phone or are you on a computer?
I'm on a computer.
Okay, if you look at your upper right hand corner, you'll see one where it says comments. If you
Yep.
tap on that, it should okay,
There you
and that should
go.
bring up your.
I see Brenton.
Yeah, Kyle
Renee.
was the
Yeah, but
first one in. Then you have Sam,
Smiley.
Bratton,
Yeah.
Dave's aquariums and thoughts, Renee,
Yeah.
Smiley. Thank you guys for
Smiley.
joining us.
Smiley always saying hello. Hello, Smiley. Right back at you.
Yeah, yeah. You got Mike, MNC Aquatics coming in,
Yeah.
so they'll be drifting in here. Now that we've gone live, it'll send off the notification for most people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no. I just want to. Oh, Alex Fathom. Wow. Well, thank you, Alex. Came in with 5 memberships.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Alex. Um, no, I wanted to say, thanks for on such a short notice accepting the
Yeah.
invitation to come on and
Not a problem.
and be able to have a conversation, get to know a little bit more about you. Hey, Linda, thanks for coming in.
And a little bit more about you too, Jorge. That's why we're here.
Yeah, I know. Yesterday we were having a conversation on the phone that I thought was pretty interesting, and the reason was that I hadn't thought about what you had said as far as trying to make it so that there's more of us kind of doing similar stuff, but you thought it might be like a situation where I might not agree with it, but you were surprised that I told you that's exactly what I would hope would happen is that in order for our community to grow, I'm of the
Yeah.
opinion that the more the merrier.
Yeah.
And
And a bit of background for everybody else that wasn't in on the conversation last night is that I went on a live. It was either Ron Garage Aquatic or Jeff Pelham back in December. And I said, this is what I want to do. I want to go on YouTube and I want to talk to fish keepers and I want to find out about fish keepers, basically do an interview thing. And I'd never met you, Jorge. I hadn't met you until January, February. And then come to find out that's sort of what you're doing. So what you do and what I plan to do, there's a bit of overlap, but I'm going to be asking different questions than I've seen you ask, and we're both taking different approaches because you'll find out with the questions that I'm going to ask you. But I think it all goes hand in hand, trying to grow the community, trying to show support. And most importantly of all to me is to hopefully be able to touch a couple of people who are watching YouTube thinking about getting into the hobby and maybe falling into the trap of watching one particular style of fish tank keeping. And you might be able to figure out what I'm talking about there. And I would say, well, there's lots of different ways to keep a tank and lots of different ways to introduce people into the hobby and kind of hold their hand along the way. So my whole thing is about growing the community and making everybody as successful as possible. And that's the end.
yeah, and I know you and I were talking that the problem is maybe a lack of resources that are a little bit more welcoming to newcomers. Because I know for the longest time everybody likes to use Facebook as a default resource to be able to go look for information and help. But the problem is that a lot of those groups have become very toxic. They've become the total epitome of, or the opposite of helping people. Because I don't know how many times, and it doesn't matter which fish group, page you go to. Somebody asking a very simple question and they get attacked. It's like, oh, you shouldn't do this. You should change that. As a matter of fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody on TikTok where the girl was showing her aquarium, and because she had colored gravel, they kind of crucified her. And they told her that that was the wrong thing to have. And then I was like, hey, wait, you know, the gravel color really doesn't matter.
Right.
It's at a
It
point
it
of
it it does to me, but we can talk about that later.
yeah, no, what I'm getting at is, if as a beginner in the hobbyist,
Yeah. Yeah.
very few of us come in with a clear view of what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of the times, what ends up happening is when you come in, you start learning about other stuff, and then your taste for what you initially thought was cool, or what you like, starts evolving based on the information you're receiving.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's part of a transition. That's part of the growth of
Yeah.
becoming a hobbyist.
Yeah.
But yeah, just it, or I don't know why filtration is such a trigger topic for a lot of people, because somebody will ask, oh, hey, I've got so and so aquarium, and automatic, oh, you got to put an FX6 on that. It's like, really?
Yeah.
I mean,
And let's also not forget that there are quite a few controlling, shall we say, YouTube channels out there.
yeah,
When
well,
when people come on YouTube and say, tropical fish and setting up a tank, they're going to get steered in one direction because some people pay to have their accounts promoted, and the people that are more reasonable don't have the resources to pay to promote their channels. But the truth is out there. It's just a matter of finding it.
yeah, it's like, it's the thing is, all this information is available, but you still have to use some discretion when it comes to using that information, because not all information is good information. And even in between that controversial information, there are some layers of truth within that stuff that if um, if you become very discerning, you'll be able to pull what is actually valuable and leave the junk on the side.
Yeah.
Um, but unfortunately, as a newcomer into the hobby, sometimes it takes you a while to figure that out.
They
But I
don't have
think
the
that's also,
experience. Yeah.
yeah, that's also part of the growing experience, and and learning, that, because you don't know any better when you come in. You don't know who's out there that is legitimately trying to help somebody, and who is out there that's trying to pitch a philosophy that they believe in, and it's so rigid that that's what you have to stay on, and that's what you have to continue to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes, what's even crazier of all this, and I'm going to use Father Fish for example, because I know he's the easy target. That's one of the ones, because he
Father,
has
father,
been
father, who?
Father Fish.
Oh,
Yeah, because sometimes he says some outlandish stuff, but here's the thing. I didn't really I just really didn't deal with it, because I gotten past that point where I knew I had experience under my belt, and I knew what was working for me and what wasn't, and stuff like that. I did take some of his strategies and doing dirted tanks and growing aquariums, but I kind of over time have modified them to fit my needs. That's what I'm saying. Even in between all that information, there's still some value there that is legitimate. Now, the bigger issue with that is not necessarily so much the content creator sometimes, but it's the supporting structure around them that is a lot of the times a lot more toxic. And you, unfortunately, that's one of the channels you see that with it. It's kind of, they brought that philosophy that you would see on Facebook pages, kind of transition over into a channel on YouTube, which is a little bit more interactive. And some of those ideas, well, shit, some people call it even like cult like behavior, and they're not too. I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch, but just you see some things there that are kind of like make you question. One of the reasons why I kind of stay away from that, because I don't want to deal with it. I think whenever he puts out information, I'll listen to some of it. I'll take what I know to be true to me and what has worked for me, and I'll apply it if I need it. And if I don't feel it's something that's going to suit me, I just let it go. It's not, you know, whatever you think of the person or whatever, that's independent. But like I said, I've had dirty tanks that were kind of initially based on his original philosophy, because that philosophy has changed over time too. How you set those things up, it seems like every so many months he retracts and goes, oh no, instead of that, adding this, add this, and which is fine too, because that's just kind of learning process. But the only thing that should tell you is he hasn't really been doing this that long as he claims to have been, because he would have worked a lot of those kinks out of it if it really been doing it for X amount of years. Because I've been doing this for, I don't know, almost 8 years, 10 years, I forget, but it was at the beginning of the teens. And I started out doing it exactly as what he would dictate, had algae problems. And I said, okay, I got to figure this out. So I started modifying the amount of substrate I was using, um, and doing different things to the point now where I can set up an aquarium using dirt and not have to go through that algae phase, because I've kind of dialed it in now.
Yeah.
So, that's how I know what he's telling you is he was kind of learning on the fly too. He had kind of stumbled on it because it seems the same growth that I saw on being able to apply to my aquariums. I kind of saw it translate on his channel. And if he had really been doing it for the eons of years that he says he's been doing it, a lot of those initial startup stuff, he would have already figured out, and he would have not been doing it the way he was doing it. So he was kind of learning on the fly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I got sucked into the dirted tank thing here. I mean, there's my and I've got a big announcement to make,
Okay.
because people who know me know that that is my aquarium. And because it's a dirted tank and I bought the wrong soil, here's my big announcement. I now have 2 aquariums. I've just doubled the number of tanks that I've got. But I found a 7.5 gallon tank just down the road for $20. Everything I need. But no, so I've got to tear this thing down. I've got to tear my tank down because the pond soil that I used wasn't the NPK wasn't advertised on Amazon where I bought it, and the NPK was 2910, which is almost double what it should be. So I got the tank for doing Neocaridina shrimp, red cherries, and I can get them to reproduce. I can get them to spawn and stuff like that. And they make it up to just about juvenile size for their first spawn, and then they die. So I've got lots of babies and lots of juveniles, but no adults. And I reckon it's because I've got potassium in the water column. So I've got a potassium test kit showing up on Friday, confirm that. Then I take everything out of that tank, stick it in my 7.5 gallon tank once it's set up and once it's turned over and ready to go. Then take all the substrate out of this tank, throw it in the bin, and then restart this tank from scratch. So anyhow, we're going to interview each other. Is
Okay.
that the understanding? Jorge.
We're here to do whatever you want to do.
Jorge, my name is Don.
Nice to
I
meet you,
call
Don.
myself Prodigal Aquarist. I'd like to know, when did you get your first fish tank?
Well, the very first fish tank,
Very first fish tank.
I think at like 16 years old, and that would have been, I want to say like 80, 88, 80, 89, somewhere around there. But I only kept it for a short period. I've always wanted a fish tank. And the reason that happened at that time is because by that time I got a job through the high school. It was a program called the Youth Experience Services. Yes, was the acronym. And what it was is, when you're in high school, you get elective periods, and depending on how far along you are in high school, you either get 1 or 2 elective periods. And I started, I think it was my junior year. So I must have been more like going from 16 to 17, I think is where that happened. And I was working my regular lunch hour and I was working my elective, I think it was after lunch. So instead of going to a 5th period, I would stay in the cafeteria washing the trays. So the first hour was setting up for lunch, bringing down the benches, doing all the stuff that we needed to do. And then during the lunch course, we were out in the back, and it was usually like 3 or 4 of us that would work in the back kitchen under the same program, and we were just watching, the lunch trays and all that stuff, rinsing them and putting them through the dishwasher, and then stacking them and doing all that stuff. So that's kind of the work that we did, and so that was like my first real paying job, and because of that, now I had a little bit of spending money, and that was one of the first things that I think I ever bought with one of those checks was, uh, I was coming home. It might have been from practice or something like that. Happened to walk through a yard sale. It was one of those now I know they're called meta tanks. And it's the ones that had
Meta frame.
the meta frames.
Yeah.
And it was the original ones because it was slate bottom. And I think it was only a 10-gallon tank, but that sucker was super heavy for a 10-gallon tank. And that was my very first aquarium. And I think the very first fish I threw in there were some convicts. Just happened to grab a pair. I don't know if it was coincidence or the store person said, "Oh, I'll be funny and give him a pair of convicts as his first fish." But
I used to sell convicts back in the 80s. I used to breed them and sell them, convicts and crebenses. I'd sell them to the local pet shop, and they would buy everything I had. So nobody knew any better back in the 80s.
yeah. And what was interesting to me is now when people say, "Hey, what's a good beginner fish?" I instead of saying the default like guppies and stuff like that, I'm really believe convicts are, because they were tough as nails. Uh, and the reason I say that is because I came into this hobby absolutely zero about the hobby. I didn't, it was one of those things where it was just a container. You put water in it, you decorated however you liked it, and you added some fish, and that was it.
Yeah.
Don't ask me if the tank was cycled or any of that stuff. I mean, those fish went through my whole learning process. And what made it even worse is that they were able to survive and reproduce successfully while putting them through all this torture. So
they're
if I was able to keep those guys alive, then that just about anybody else is probably going to have some success with them.
Do you remember the first aquarium full of fish you ever saw?
It had to be at a doctor's office.
Yeah.
It had to be at a doctor's office. They were a lot more prevalent. I don't see them anymore like I used to. I don't know if it was almost like mandatory, but I remember every single doctor office or dentist that I went to had a goldfish or something like that in the aquariums. Usually it was goldfish. For some reason, goldfish were very prevalent in doctor's offices.
Yes, stress relievers.
Yeah, I guess so. But that's where my fascination with fish started. And then, I would see, what was it? Was it Walmart? I think it was. No, because Walmart, I was already a teenager, I think. But I'd still go to they used to sell fish, and I would, my mom would ask me to give her a ride to the store or whatever. She'd go do the shopping. I'd be hanging out at the fish section. Initially they had a whole aisle with 2 shelves, and they were selling fish off of those. And then eventually got narrowed down to just one side of the shelves. And then I guess by the time I got out of the hobby and came back, that was no longer a thing. Walmart was no longer selling fish.
Well, I can remember, because I'm a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
I can remember when Sears and Woolworths used to sell tropical fish.
You see, I didn't know about fish. There was a Woolworth, and I remember some of the guys that I grew up that are similar in my age, and they used to tell me that Woolworth had fish.
Yeah.
But I never went to Woolworths when I was younger. That was not something that I would have known about. But there was also a hardware store. But this is by the time I'm already interested in fish. There was a Ace or a True Value hardware store, and they had fish in there. And there used to be a local, like a mom and pop, called Imperial Hardware Stores, and they had fish in there too. And and then I think at the time when I was into the hobby, there used to be one fish store that I used to know, and it used to be Art's Fish Store, But it was interesting because the business itself was like a window. They used to do like the springs for the screens for the windows, and they would repair glass. They would sell you. They were fixed windows basically,
Yeah, yeah.
and I guess the hobby for the owner, he also liked fish. So in the shop, you walked in, you went past the display counters for the window shop, down the side of the business, and then you walked into a fish room. And that's where he had the fish shop there too. So those are the three places that I knew that I could get fish when I was younger.
Cool. Cool. So you're going to bounce back a question at me?
Yes. Why Prodigal Aquarist?
Ah, uh, multitude of reasons. First of all, my daddy was a preacher. He was my pastor
Okay.
for 7 years, and his father, before him, as they say, was an evangelist patriarch in the church, quite high up. And I understood the story of prodigal son to be the son who took his half of the inheritance and left and didn't stay and work the farm or whatever, and squandered his fortune and then came home and threw himself on his father's mercy, basically asking for support, and was granted that, and he was a prodigal son. So not only am I a preacher's son, I was born and raised probably pretty obviously in the States, in the Midwest. I've lived in London, in England, for 35 years now, and I've not gone home except for visits and funerals and stuff like that. But also along the way, I mean, I had my first fish tank, which is a Metaframe 10-gallon with a slate bottom, and yes, they did weigh a ton. I got my first fish tank, I reckon it was about 1969.
Okay.
All right. And I went away to university in Iowa and Missouri, and I was out there for 6 years working construction. And I was an underwater basket weaver, and I was a grave digger, and I laid sewer pipe, and I built houses and all sorts of different stuff. A waiter in a pizza restaurant, you name it, I did it. Excuse me. Moved back to Ohio, um, and got the tropical fish bug. So I'd had a few tanks before I went to college. My dad looked after those. I came back to Ohio. My tanks were gone by then, and I got back into the hobby. And I had 3 or 4 tanks, and I was like, just starting to get back into it. And I saw a sign in the local pet shop. It said Greater Fairfield County Aquarium Society. Tear off the telephone number and give these guys a call. You can join their fish club. So I called the number. I lived in Franklin County, which is where Columbus, Ohio is. But I went to high school down in Lancaster, which is Fairfield County. And I called this number down in Fairfield County, and the guy that answers the phone was a high school friend of mine running the local fish club, the Fish Society. So I joined straight away. And I thought to myself, I've got a problem because I've got 4 aquariums and I want more. But I went to the first meeting and I met people that had 20 aquariums, and everybody thought it was normal. And I'm like, oh, they've just validated my entire tropical fish interest. I'm not as weird as I thought I was. There are other people out there like me. And I learned so much. I picked up calls from the fish swap meets and stuff like that that turned into show champion winners. I've taken best of show with a wild green swordtail that was somebody else's cull out of their tank, but I grew it in a 55-gallon tank with my Australian rainbows, and I got the big trophy to show for it and all of that stuff. And I was just absolutely done up. Then I found myself in London. It didn't have any aquariums. Got married, got an aquarium. The marriage failed, had to get rid of the aquarium. Fast forward another 20, 30, 25 years, and here I am, and I've just got this aquarium here last year and that aquarium there this afternoon. So I left the hobby. I came back, and I'm begging for forgiveness. Please, everybody, forgive me. I'm just doing my best to make up for lost time and lost service to the community. So
Oh, well,
therein lies the reason behind Prodigal Aquarist.
I think that story is kind of similar to a lot of us. I mean, it's not an uncommon story where we start off as younger teenagers or whatever, keeping aquariums.
Yeah.
And then just life happens in general. Your interests are captivated by other experiences,
Yeah.
and you just kind of go away from it until you get to a point back in your life where you go, hey, I remember I used to do this and I used to enjoy it.
I
And you
remember
kind
what
of,
made me happy.
yeah. And you gradually work your way back into it. And then it just becomes out of control sometimes, like it did for me.
I got
Where,
myself up to 27 tanks, but that only took me a couple of years. So
yeah, but that's just normal. I mean, that's more of a normal occurrence, and especially for a lot of people that go away from home for any extended period of time.
yeah.
It's hard to keep up. Even the people that are initially helping you out might lose this interest because it's not their hobby, and it's kind of like, all right, I don't want to do this anymore.
I'm checking out. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So Jorge, what first attracted you to fish? I mean, you bought a fish tank because you had some pocket money and you walked past a yard sale, but
It's one
you
of
bought
those
the
things.
convicts because they're bulletproof, or the guy sold them to you. But what was the hook?
Uh, I just think my ability to be able to stay still for an extended period of time, because I was very hyperactive as a kid. I don't know. You see, I just had a lot of energy as a kid. I don't believe in the labeling of people. I just think they throw that willy nilly. I was just very, very active. I had a lot of energy, and very few things ever kept my interest long enough for me to settle down and pay attention. And I found out that aquariums, for some reason I can't explain to you, did the opposite, and they would just capture me, my imagination, I guess. And before I knew it, I could be sitting there quietly without doing anything. 30, 40 minutes would just go by, and I would not even realize that's how much time would happen.
Yeah.
So for me, it was always a fascination of just being able to see the fish, period, because fish exist in the world, but growing up, you were lucky enough if you saw a fish come up to the surface of a pond or a lake and then quickly disappear. So you never really got to appreciate how nice they looked or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
being able to view into a glass box and see that,
Get the
one
front on
was,
view instead of the top
yeah,
down. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that was like an experience for me that just kind of, just captured me. And so that was the big thing. And as far as I can remember, I don't think there was a lot of planet tanks when I was growing up. Um, a lot of the aquariums that I vividly remember was just the fish and water. That was it, and whatever filtration system they had in there. Occasionally, you would have something with some type of colored gravel that wasn't natural looking. It would be, black or blue or whatever the person decided, and maybe a few, like artificial plants to make it look like they were natural. But you didn't think much about it back then because you thought that was just kind of like normal. It's not until recently that planet aquariums have become a little bit more normalized. I don't know if plants. People tell me there's been plants ever since, but they weren't as prevalent, or they weren't necessarily used, I guess, for the decorative purposes that they are now. So
I remember the very first aquarium I ever saw, and it was my great granddad who emigrated from England to the States, which is quite
mm,
ironic because I've just come the other way. But this was back in the mid 60s. And he was a very, very handy, very crafty person. He built a church and he built 4 or 5 houses and stuff like that. And he made telescopes and he made clocks and he turned wood and did carvings and made boots and all sorts of stuff. And in his house, he had, I don't know if it was a homemade aquarium or if it was something that was bought, but it was a slate bottom and it was a big ass tank. It was tall. I'd say it was probably 80, 90 gallons, something like that. And it fit in a bay window that oddly he had built on the side of his house. So it didn't get direct light, but it was in a bright room. And he had bored a hole in the slate in the bottom of the tank and put a valve in it for doing water
Mm.
changes. And when he told me the story, he said, when I set the tank up, I went down to the drugstore, probably Woolworths, and I bought a bag of common guppies, which is looks an awful lot like what we call Endler guppies today,
Mm.
and a bag of Anacharis, which is what we call Elodia today, and I chuck them in the tank. And I feed them every morning, and they get fed once a day, and they just get on with it. And once a week or once every 2 weeks, I put a bucket underneath the valve in the bottom, and I turn the handle, and I empty a bucket of water out of the tank, and I close the valve, and I chuck that bucket of water away, or on the grapevines in the backyard is probably what he did. And then he'd top it up. He never bought a second, never bought any more fish, never bought any more plants. And the thing just, and it was just a sea of green with little tiny fish swimming all over the place. They just multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. He never put a net in and dipped anything out. He never sold any fish. He just let them control themselves. And I was fascinated by that. And it was a couple of years after that that I bought my first aquarium secondhand and just got on with the hobby. But I think I was scarred for life by that experience, and I was just enchanted by the whole thing, and I have been ever since.
Yeah. Um, I was going to ask you something because I've tried racking my brain to remember, but I don't think I ever used dechlorinator whenever I did water changes. Were you aware of the fact that you had to
Yeah,
add dechlorinator to your water
yeah,
back when you started up?
yeah. We had a little tiny blue bottle with a red fish on the front, and in white letters it said D-chlor,
Mm.
D-chlor, CHLOR, and it was 1 drop per gallon. And what they said was you put 1 drop in a gallon jug, fill it up with tap water, let that sit overnight, and then you can add it to your tank the next day. If you're
So
desperate, you
basically,
can.
they were selling you food dye.
Well, it's just clear
Oh,
liquid, but you didn't have to aerate the water.
yeah.
But I mean, back then, the only water parameters that freshwater hobbyists knew about was temperature and pH.
Yeah.
There was no ammonia, no nitrate, no nitrate. That was all saltwater stuff. That was all saltwater because I had a job when I was in high school. I had a job in a pet shop, and I walked in the pet shop. It was a pet land, and the guy just bought the franchise and opened up. And I walked in and I said, "Who looks after your fish?" He said, "I don't know anything about fish." I said, "Well, I know a lot about fish, freshwater fish." And I said, "You need to hire me. I'll look after your freshwater tanks." He said, "What about saltwater?" I said, "No, no, not interested. Too complicated. Too much science for me." So he looked after the saltwater tanks. I looked after the freshwater tanks. And here I am today, keeping an eye on my ammonia and my nitrate and my nitrate that I never wanted to do with the saltwater tanks to begin with.
Yeah, no, I've tried remembering, and I don't think I used anything to add to the water, which goes again to show how resilient these poor fish were. They
Yeah.
must have been in a torture chamber when I was keeping them because I did everything you're not supposed to do. And but no, we were on city water. We were just straight up. Somebody was asking me if we were on well water. No, we were on regular city water. Periodically you could smell the chlorine in the water whenever you'd open the tap, but it wasn't always. And I guess fortunately enough, it never happened when I was doing water changes. But my water changes was not something that was scheduled to be done. It was when my mom would say, "Hey, you need to do something about that thing because it smells." And if I continue to smell that, I'm going to throw it out of the house. That's when I knew it was time to do a water change. And I used to do the dreaded empty out the aquarium, scrub the tank, rinse out the gravel, everything you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Throw everything back in there, and by the grace of God, everything survived. The fish that I had in there made it through. So yeah, it's just now that I'm aware of what I was doing, that I've actually learned more about the fish keeping side of it. I'm horrified by what I was doing because, I was basically torturing those fish now. But again, it also remembering that it gives me comfort to know that fish are a lot more resilient than we like to give them credit for. Um, I I don't like extremes. I don't like the overbearing water changes every 5 minutes, kind of, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't like the never do anything kind of stuff. I'm kind of like somewhere in between those two extremes. Some aquariums might go a little bit longer than others, but I still eventually get around and do a water change. Now, if somebody were to ask me how often do you do it, I don't know. I guess I do them once every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, because I'll go, like right now that I'm doing night shift, I don't do water changes. It won't happen until I either come on my days off or I'm working swings again. And usually that's about a 2 week iteration.
Yeah.
And so that's when I'll do them, when I have time to do them. But I'm not overly concerned or any of that stuff. I have gone the route where I wanted to see what's the longest I can go without doing a water change. And eventually you're going to crash a tank. There is no such thing as going indefinitely, and you're going to crash it if you're feeding it. And if you're doing that kind of stuff, eventually you're going to crash it. You got to do at some
Yeah.
point. You got to do some water changes. And
Got to do the housekeeping.
yeah,
I got a question for you. If somebody gave you a 200-gallon tank and a nice stamp to put it on, and it was in a place where you could observe the tank on a regular basis, would you rather fill that tank? Would you rather put 2 or 3 great big bully fish in that tank, or would you rather have hundreds of tetras and guppies and nano fish and stuff like that?
I know exactly what I would do with it because I've seen that tank.
Yeah.
Mike Coleman, I did a tour of his house, and that's the one tank I did not fill. I think it was like either a 90-gallon or something like that he has in his living room.
Yeah.
Beautiful tank. What I love about that tank, it's the gift that keeps on giving. He has it heavily planted. I can't recall off the top of my head how many plants he's got in there. But he's got tons of plants. I mean, just looking at the tank itself is impressive by the amount of plants, the different types of plants he's got in there. That's the first thing that grabs your attention. And you start looking at it, and then you'll see, oh, he's got some shrimp in here. And then you start paying a little bit more attention, and he's got some chili rasboras, he's got some CPDs, he's got an infinite amount of fish in there.
Yeah.
That you don't pick it up at once, but once you sit in front of that aquarium. And it was so funny because I was looking, we were done with the filming of his fish room, right? And I said, "Oh man, Mike, I didn't know you had that there." He goes, "Oh yeah," and he was laughing. He was standing next to his mom, and he goes, "Yeah, go check it out if you want." And I said, "Okay," because I'm in his house. I'm not just going to be wandering around his living room. So I stand up in there, and they both laughed out loud when I was looking in there, and I go, "Oh shit." He goes, him and his mom were laughing. He goes, "That's exactly what everybody says when they look at it," because you start looking at it, and all of a sudden some CPDs came out from the plants.
Yeah.
They were the brightest red CPDs that I've ever seen. It just that it startled me how good they looked, because everywhere I had looked, they looked sick. They look like they have sunken belly, and they're kind of, the colors are not popping. So it just didn't. I had never seen anything that looked that good and healthy.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because he goes, "Yep, that's pretty much everybody's reaction." So yeah, that's exactly what I would do with a big tank like that. Is
Completely agree. And then
set up something.
then you spend $200 on a pleco, and for the next 3 years you play spot the pleco because you never see them again.
Yeah, I
Ones
think
always hide.
the only plecos that would be interested in keeping are probably either snowball plecos, but the dwarf sides one, or or the zebra.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't have any more interest in a lot of these other plecos. I wouldn't pursue them. If the opportunity to buy some of these nicer, plecos came across at a extremely good deal, then believe me, I'd get them. But yeah, I'm not the big pleco enthusiast. I think right now what is becoming a little bit more trending, because it's the hobby in itself is an interesting phenomena, because it goes through these trends and cycles. you'll see things that all of a sudden, and I think right now, even though nanos are probably at their peak and they're on the backside of that peak, what's really I hear a lot of people commenting and talking about is corridoras because they're
Yeah.
finding new coloration, new difference, and I think that's as nanofish are on the backside of that. I think Corys are on the upside. They're going to replace that, and that's going to be the
Yeah.
trend that'll be very popular and in high demand for the next few years.
Because people understand how to breed them now.
That and it seems like they're introducing
Yeah,
newer
they're
colorations.
finding more species. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and stuff that people were saying were like extremely complicated to breed. I think they've kind of cracked the code on a lot of those, and people are having success breeding them at home. And it's an interesting fish. I don't know if it would be my piece fish. I like them. I mean, I
Yeah,
have Corys in all my aquariums.
yeah.
Um, but I don't know if that would be necessarily my centerpiece fish.
I'm not sure what mine would be yet, but I've got lots of time to think about that.
Yeah,
So do you sell anything online?
not online. What I sell is here locally, or I take it to the store that I've kind of developed a relationship with, which would be the chlorophyll corner.
Right.
And it's gotten to a point now where he's giving me some species. He goes, if you can breed these, I'll take whatever fries you get from them.
Sure.
So that's how I've managed to kind of broaden my availability of the fish that I have, is because I've over the years now we've been interacting for probably about 2 years now, and it's taken about that long to where Joe is it feels like, all right, you're not full of shit, so you know I'll deal with you. So that's he takes all my guppy coals, because people are always coming into the store. Not everybody's looking for line fish
Yeah.
because they demand a little bit more money. And I found that here locally too, that people are fascinated more than anything else by the different colorations and
Yeah.
the different patterns and stuff like that. That I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna strain out some fish, some guppy lines, and I'm gonna sell the dumble ear mosaic. Those are gonna be like a line that I'm gonna strictly keep. And I had some other ones that I was trying to, figure out what I was gonna do with them. Well, come to find out, yeah, people think those are cool, but they don't want to pay $20-$30 for a pair. They rather go into my cold tank that I have down here, and they like it because it's got the rainbow. It's
It's
any
got
there's
the colors they
and they
like. Yeah.
yeah, and
Mhm.
those sell a lot more, at least for me,
Yeah.
than any of the other. So I got to the point now where I said, why am I trying to force the hand, right?
Yeah.
So I still have the lines that are straight that I initially got, but periodically I'll scoop if I get too many fries in there and throw them in the cold tank, because I know that's what's gonna make money for me is the cold tank.
Indeed.
Uh,
So uh, do you have any automation in
no,
your fish room?
no, no, no automation. I've simplified the way that I do water changes, but no, nothing that I can turn a valve and it does it. I was very curious by what Ron did, the system he had set up, but I guess he's still working out the bugs off of that. He
Yeah.
had some issues. It looked like a good idea, but I haven't talked to Ron to see how far along he's come with that. But I know he was having some issues with leaking, but I think it might be just the choice of connectors that he might have used.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan. I've never used automation. I mean, again, when I had the most amount of tanks I've had is 27,
Mm.
and a couple of those were breeding tanks, and it was angels and plex and bettas and barbs and cribs and convicts and stuff like that. And most of the tanks were just grow out tanks, so all bare bottoms and very few plants and stuff like that. And I had it down to a place where I'd spend an hour and 15 minutes every night before I went to bed at doing maintenance. So minimal water changes, sucking the moam off the bottom glass and stuff like that, and paying attention to the fish and feeding them, feeding them a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, instead of just bang, there's all your food. Um, and a friend of mine who's into gardening techniques put up a phrase the other day that I that I think suits my approach, and that's mindful observation. When you get to the point where your fish room requires it, in my view, when you get to the point where your fish room requires automation for water changes and stuff like that, you no longer have time for what's called mindful observation, where you can sit and observe your fish while you're doing a water change, their health and their behavior, how fit they are they breeding and stuff like that. And if you don't take time to appreciate your fish, then I think you're missing a point. Or, if someone doesn't take the time to sit and mindfully observe the fish, then they have too many tanks and too many fish. How do you feel about that?
No, I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's never been the object. Well, not yet. I know eventually I want to get to that point where, where I probably do breed full time. I think right now a lot of my breeding that I do is more for not having to buy more fish. Trying to cut down on the expense. But if you look at my fish room, I supposedly have a breeding fish room, but you wouldn't think that I do because of the way I do everything you're not supposed to do with breeders. You're not supposed to, plant them. You can have plants in there. There's workarounds where you can have plants. You can put them in containers or pots or whatever to be able to remove them. So when it comes time to collect the fish, you can do that.
Yeah.
But I can't help myself and not make them display tanks. They for me, the appeal of these aquariums is that I want to be able to see them, look into them. I'm not a big fan of bare bottoms, nothing like the sterile looking tanks, which I know what the purpose of those tanks. I totally understand it and why they exist. I just can't get away from having that. I set up an entire rack that was supposed to be my breeding rack, and it became one of those things where, well, I'm going to put some substrate because I want some beneficial bacteria on the bottom. That was my excuse. And then I go to trim aquariums that I have planted, and it's like, well, I'm not going to throw the trimmings away. I'm going to just put them in there and grow them out. And before I know it, they're all planted. And it's the worst thing you want to do when it comes, if you're trying to breed fish. Well, not necessarily the breeding, it's perfect. It's if you're trying to sell fish out of those tanks where it becomes a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because now you're having to struggle with a planted tank and collect whatever it is you're trying to remove out of there, which makes it like 3 times harder. But yeah, for me, as much as I would love to just have breeders, I can't help myself. All of them have some sort of. I don't have any bare bottoms. I don't have, even the bows that I have set up are all dirted and substrated, and they start off as bare bottoms. Don't get me wrong. They start off with me saying, yeah, these are specifically breeder tanks, but that goes out the window within a couple of months.
Best laid plans. Right. If there's a YouTuber out there who is thinking about getting into fish keeping, what would be your first 2 pieces of advice to them?
Be patient, and be patient is probably going to be the one that you're going to have to really practice, and do some research. I mean, do some research, and not just one source. Try multiple sources. And the reason I say that is because eventually you're going to see where the commonality of, where the common point is in all this information. And you got to be, once you start seeing a specific topic that gets addressed in different points, you can kind of go, okay, well, this is important. Because sometimes if you rely, especially like on social media, like YouTube, to try to learn, you're going to learn what's been working for that person and what they've had success. But just because it's being successful for them doesn't automatically translate to you having the same success
with their water in their neighborhood with their supplier.
There's just so many variants. But that's not, see, that's the thing though. That is something that you learn as your progression and your knowledge evolves within the hobby. And so that's what I'm saying. Don't get stuck with the first thing that pops up. And YouTube is bad about this because they're not going to give you the most informative channel. They're going to give you the most popular channel. And those two things don't always coincide. Not
YouTube is
always.
not research. YouTube is
Yeah.
not research. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. So, just, adhere to what makes sense. Uh, what is try to stay away from the areas that can become pretty contentious, the extreme sides of things. And I know that some of those extremes could be appealing because they tell you don't have to do anything other than just sit there and enjoy, which is fine, but that's not necessarily always true.
Yeah.
The factor that's missing from that is that you need to have a working knowledge of what's going on in your aquarium before you can pull off some of those things. And so, it's just, and unfortunately, I don't think Facebook is also the best option because I think it's just become so toxic, so toxic. I still haven't been able to find, and it's funny because a lot of those pages start off with the good intent of helping people out.
Yeah, but they're
But
full of people with attitudes.
yeah, it's keyboard heroes,
Yeah.
people that like to hide behind being anonymous and then be able to say some of the worst things they can say because there's not going to be a repercussion.
Yeah.
And
I
so
sup
they
I
they
suppose I suppose I was quite lucky when I got started is because we didn't have tremendously exotic fish available in the pet shops. I mean, my first fish were black skirt tetras, bleeding heart tetras, and Corydorus catfish because that's what the pet shop had. And they said those are hardy fish. You're probably not going to kill them if it's your first fish tank.
yeah.
And other than that, I had to rely on the knowledge of the staff at my local fish shops, and they were plentiful back in the late '60s and early '70s. They were everywhere, unlike today, unfortunately. And other than that, it was going to the school library every other month, waiting for the new release of Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine, which is about that big and about 50 pages deep. And you just read every single article in that magazine. That's because we had no internet, we had no nothing. We had I didn't even know of a local fish club. If I wanted to buy fish, I get out the newspaper and go through the classified ads in the pets and pet supplies section and look for people selling fish. And I call them up and say, "Can I come and have a look?" Just to pick their brains, just to see what fish they had and to pick their brains. And I met people with basements full of aquariums, and it just fascinated freaks like us. But these old men showing me discus that they were breeding, a big mommy discus. It had all these little fries sucking the slime off the sides of their bodies because that's how the fry feed off a discus. And it's just like, wow, what an amazing universe we live in.
Well, let me ask you this: when because I was trying to remember this too, because I took such a big gap in between when I was keeping fish and when I came back. There still seems to be a lot of the same fish that were available back when I was doing it when I started out, but they look so different. Discus being one of them. I don't ever
Yeah.
remember seeing so many different colors like there is now. I remember
Discus
the
were
discus
green
that
and brown.
yeah,
Discus
they
were
were
green and
like
brown.
with vertical striping on them. That don't get me wrong, they still look beautiful. That's kind of still one of my favorite fish. Um,
Well, look at Jose's. Look at Jose's discus. It's just like,
yeah, there's and so that was a big surprise for me when I came back and I was like, whoa, there's
yeah,
this many. And not knowing, and I was assuming, well, how? Well, where did they find these out in nature? But again, it's one of
they
those
did.
things where you start peeling back the layers. The more you get involved with this, and you start, oh no, those are selectively bred. They kind of took this fish and created that. Same thing with guppies. I remember guppies were more like silver bodied, color in the tail. That's all I remember, just color in the tail. Um, some blotching and stuff like that. Come back, there's an infinite amount of different colorations, names. There's leopard and tiger
Blue
and
bluegrass.
cobra. And yeah, it's just all these other things, and the colors are totally different. The tails are
Yeah,
a lot bigger. That totally changed. Another one of that is like bettas. Bettas were
yeah,
mostly spade tails, and they were either like green or they were blue. Come back, you have these enormous like tails that look like sails on the back of these fish, and the colors, the color, and they're still coming out with more and more different ones. But it's funny how, excuse me, ah,
Bless
how
you.
much. Thank you.
Speaking of Jose, he did give you a super chat, by the
Yeah,
way.
I saw that. Thank you, Jose. It was, I appreciate that. And so it was one of those things where it's like, this has, and then you come back and there's so many electric blue cars. I didn't know that was a thing. I came back and saw those and it's like, wow, you get taken aback because of the way they just kind of shine and you know they look, and it's like, whoa, where did they find these? Well, it's either selectively bred, or it's, I don't think they're necessarily out there in nature like that. But yeah, that's why all these comments where, oh, when these people start getting into wild caught versus tank raised, and that's not natural, this is natural. If we really, really are serious about this, a lot of the fish that we're keeping wouldn't necessarily fit the argument of natural because they've been tinkered by us.
Yeah,
Whether it's been,
same with dogs.
yeah, we've tinkered with them to do selectively breeding, but still, that's not natural. That doesn't happen in nature. That's why you don't
Uh,
find them in nature.
sometimes it does. It could be
Yeah,
argued. I don't believe in forcing it. I'd rather get a bag of species and stick them in a tank and just let them get on with it and sit back and enjoy.
yeah,
To me, the original excitement was, first of all, I didn't kill the fish that I bought, and then secondly, you get to watch the fish grow, and thirdly, if you're lucky, you get to watch the fish reproduce. You get to watch them spawn and raise their young or eat their young, if whatever happens in nature. But to me, that was sort of that meant I completed a lap, a circle, and I didn't kill anything, or I didn't kill them all. And to me, that was a win. And the longer I went, the better I got at it. But it certainly is a hobby that forces patience upon you. If you're not gifted with patience at the beginning, you certainly have patience by the end of it, or you're just not going to be successful.
mm,
We are gardeners. They are the fruit, sort of thing, and you just need to let them get on with it. We provide them with what they need and then step back. I'm not the sort of guy that's got my hands in the tank every day. I refuse to do that. Um, I might have my hand in the tank once a week, but that's the nature of this particular tank, and I don't
yeah,
like doing that. I interfere as little as possible and let them get on with it, and I sit back and I enjoy.
yeah. Well, that's the whole idea of that. I mean, for me, I I've always said I don't like to necessarily be messing around with the tanks. I kind of like to sit here and enjoy them. I mean, for crying out loud, I have a bench in my garage that I dedicate to sitting on and watching my tanks. So
Why not? Why not?
yeah, so that's why have so many if you're not going to sit down and enjoy them. I mean, that's just me. I know people have a lot because they're breeding, but for me, it's uh, I guess I was always fascinated by the pet stores and the the number of aquariums that they would have. That I think I've had a fascination for that I've kind of replicated that in my garage,
Yeah.
but it's more for me being a hoarder and having all these other extra, you know, fish that I find interesting and being able to keep them, and e eventually you get the bug where you wanna say, "Okay, can I make more of these?" Because I don't wanna go out and pay X amount of dollars for a group. So let me start off with a few of them, see if I can, be able to make more of them, and that's kinda where I'm at now. Once in a while, I get stuff and I'll go, "Okay, let me see if I can make more of these because I really like them, and see what happens."
Make them more available to other fish keepers, which is another great thing about uh, fish clubs.
Yeah.
You'll find
Y
fish in fish clubs because people involved in breeders awards points programs and stuff like that, that you won't find in a pet shop.
yeah.
One of the things that shocked me, and I've not spoken to anybody about this publicly, but one of the things that really, really shocked me when I came back into the hobby is how willing people are to put fish in the post and leave them at the mercy of USPS or
Mhm.
UPS or FedEx or whatever, and how often things go wrong. Um, and yeah, I've ordered shrimp by post. I've ordered plants by post. I've ordered a nearite snail by post, but I'm not going to order fish by post. That's just me. That's
Mhm.
just me. I think the fish deserve better than that. If I've got to drive an hour down the road to get the fish, then I'll do that. If I have to go to the pet shop and say, here's the money, I'll pay you now to order the fish. And when they come in 2 weeks, I'll have them thank you very much.
Yeah,
Just
I
so
used to be.
they know they're not risking anything, but I wouldn't put fish in the post. It's just not me.
Yeah, that's not my preferred method. I'm more of a, I like to be able to see what I'm gonna buy.
Yeah.
And there's nothing beats it like being able to go physically to the place and
Yeah.
seeing them. But I've had some success with um, receiving mail order fish and stuff like that. I would not hesitate one iota to order from somebody like Jeff Kane, because boy, did I put his fish through the test because he, he ended up sending me a bunch of fish as I was going on vacation. Luckily, I had a friend of mine pick them up so they wouldn't be sitting out in the heat. But they were in the box for more than a week, and that's not counting the time that that they were in the mail for. And I really thought when I came back that I was gonna have bad news. Every single fish made it. So but he does take a lot of steps to ensure that the transport of his fish are going to be okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to take a lot of persuading, but then again, because I live in England, you're
yeah,
not allowed to send shrimp, or you're not allowed to send fish through the post. You
since you
can
brought
send
that
shrimp.
up,
You can send
uh,
shrimp and snails, but there's only two companies in the UK that are licensed to transport live animals, that dogs, cats, whatever, and including tropical fish, and they must be climate controlled and it must be next day delivery.
okay,
So
yeah, no. One of the things that I was curious that I wanted to ask you,
yeah.
because you've experienced the hobby now in two different continents or countries. um, I and this is all just assumptions off of what I see on the internet, but fish keeping outside of the United States is very different than the way we do it here in the States. Here, it seems like in the States, we always want bigger and more, bigger, bigger and more, bigger and more. And I don't see that so much in other countries. Is that what's it like for you, the experience of being a fish keeper in England, in the UK?
um well, it's probably down to how much space you have in your home more than anything else. When I had my 27 aquariums, I shared an apartment with a guy that I worked with. It was a townhouse thing in Columbus, Ohio, and we had a full basement. Washer, dryer. I had the dartboard over there, and I had one wall, cinder block wall down in the basement with cinder blocks and scaffolding planks, and I had 2 gallon, 5 gallon, 10 gallon, 20 gallon tanks up to wrought iron stands with 40s and 55s as my final grow out tanks. And I had oodles of space. I had like Jeff Pelham's basement. I had that much room. Okay, over here I've got this tank there, and over in the opposite corner, my flatmate has got a 360-liter L-shaped tank. And this 7.5 gallon tank, I'm afraid, is going to have to go on a dresser in my bedroom. And then that's it. I'm out of space. There's just no room. When I was working in Germany on contract for a year, and German are mad about fish, man. Germans are mad about fish. Um, I worked with a guy. He would keep loads of 10-gallon tanks indoors with all sorts of fish in them, and he just stacked them up right next to each other inside the house. And as soon as summer came along, he had a front porch that was heavily treed and planted and covered from the direct sunlight. And he'd just pick all his tanks. He'd drain them halfway down, pick his tanks up, and just set them outside on the front porch. Just stick them on the ground, and they would just eat mosquito larvae and whatever whatever bugs fell into the tank, and that was them for the summer. And they'd breed, and they've, they get along quite happily. Different different cultures do their fish different ways, but over here in this country, especially, the space is such a premium that you just don't have the room. Um, you find an old house, and when I first got married, the apartment that my wife and I had was an old Edwardian house that was converted into 4 different apartments. So we had the upper ground floor, and our living room was probably 20 by 25 feet, and the ceilings were, I think, 11 or 12 feet high, and it was a massive, great room with the bow window in the front. And I did have a 40-gallon tank in there, but that's the one I only had for a couple of years, and then I had to give it up. But we had no basement. We're so close to the Thames in London. The water table is so high you just can't dig down. Just can't do it. So
Yeah, and I was always interested because it seems to me, at least what you see on YouTube and stuff like that, because of that restriction of not having either really, really big aquariums or a lot of aquariums, it seems like more attention goes to that one aquarium that they do keep. So they tend to be more like aquascape tanks because it allows them that satisfaction. And these are all assumptions that I'm making, of course. But if it were my situation, it would allow me to be a little bit more interactive with my aquarium. If I got to go in there and trim plants periodically, if I got to,
yeah,
do these things, and it just kind of, I guess, feels that need to do something with an aquarium. Because I know when I started out, just having one aquarium drove me nuts because I couldn't do anything with it. I had to wait. I had to be patient. I had
yeah,
to, once wait for it to cycle. Then you had to wait for the plants to grow in and then trim them and then replant them. But it wasn't like I could be doing something consistently with them. And I think um, if you start going with the one tank and you focus on that one tank, then your idea of fish keeping kind of changes to your need of of activity with it. So it's not
yeah.
uncommon to see some gorgeously scaped tanks because that's all they have is that one tank.
Yeah, it depends on the keeper's motivation, though. Do they want a living art installation in the home, which includes plants and special lighting and fish and critters and shrimp and all of that stuff? Or does somebody just want to breed lots of guppies and flog them down to the pet shop once a month or whatever? It all depends on their motivation, and what's in the hobby for them. And thank God we're all different. We in YouTube and in the fish fam, we meet lots of people who are similar to us, but there's nobody exactly like us. And we should always remember that. You're not the same
Mhm.
as anybody else. I'm not the same as anybody else, but I understand a lot about what drives you because I've been there myself, and I understand a lot about what drives all of these people. And hello, Tracy, how you doing? Just saw Tracy Anderson in chat. She's come from somewhere else.
Mhm.
Anyhow, yeah,
Oh,
it all
okay.
depends on it all depends
Yeah,
on
no. Hey,
on what somebody's reason is.
where do we go?
I'm still here.
Oh, my internet must be acting up because it kind of glitched right now and we disappeared for a second. Really, it's fine. The other. Can you hear me?
I can
Yeah.
hear you, but your image is frozen.
What's going on? See Don first a little bit. His screen got there. He is. He's back. Oh, I'm frozen. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my internet. I know we've had for the last year a new company come in and put fiber optics, and they've been connecting the blocks slowly. And I don't know if they're messing with it today because the trucks are out there. I don't know what they're doing, but
Yeah.
I'm not on fiber optics, but I don't know if they're messing with the other lines. Not too smart to figure that out yet, but I know my internet's kind of acting up more than usual. Um, yeah, no, that's like I said, going back to our initial conversation before. I thought it was going to be something bad when you said we need to talk before I go on live. I said, "Oh shit!"
No, no,
What
no.
happened? What happened? But when you said that, what you were explaining, that you were wanted to do something similar, I'm all for it. I think that I've told you, and I truly believe this because I've seen it happen, and I've seen the success that it happens. And you know, I, I don't usually talk about this a lot in my live streams, but I do spend a lot of time watching other content just other than just fish keeping. I mean, as much as I love it, I do watch other stuff. But one of the models of success that I've seen that's happened, and I would love to see it, to emulate it and see it brought to ours, is I watch a lot of the stuff that podcast that Joe Rogan does, and and I've seen the success that he's had by having these conversations with people that he finds interesting. But not only that, he's always talked about being able to have success in numbers, so much to the point where he used to get a lot of criticism from people because he kept telling all his friends and people that he met, you need to do a podcast. You need to do a podcast. And it's funny, it's gotten to the point now where a lot of his I guess you would say his close friends are doing similar style podcasts and having on the same guest. Like, it's not uncommon to see one guest appear on Joe Rogan, and then he'll be on Theo Vaughn, and then he'll be on with Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura, and they kind of do this lap, and it's the same guest, but it's never the same interview.
Yeah.
It's the same person, similar questions, but it's never the same interview. And that's what, when you were saying that you'd want to do, I was like, hell yeah, you need to
Yeah.
do it. Because even though you and I could be having a conversation right now and answering certain questions, the next time we come together, it could be totally different. There'll be something totally different to talk about.
Absolutely.
You and I could have the same guest come on a day difference, but the questions or the things that I'm interested in knowing about that person are going to be totally different than what you're going to
Yeah.
come up with. And
Yeah.
even though it's the same format, it's the same style of questions, you'll notice that the responses are different. And a lot of it also is, uh, the comfort, the level that you have with the person, the guest and the interviewer.
Yeah.
And if you feel comfortable, you're going to open up more. If you don't, you might be a little bit more reserved. The other thing that I told you that happens very often is that it could be that guest's first appearance on a live stream. So, like everything else, when you do it for the first time, there's a sense of hesitation, maybe a little bit of nerves. You're not comfortable with what you're going to say,
Yeah.
and you hold back. But given that opportunity to go on somebody else,
Yep.
you're going to go, okay, I understand what this is. I understand how this interaction takes place, so I can be a little bit more open, more free.
Yep. Yep.
And you get to know more and more of that person at different levels, even though it's the same style interview, it's the same, person, but every
Yep.
single time that they pop up on somebody else's live stream, um, it just, it allows that person to have a little bit more comfort, and they can talk about other stuff they probably didn't do it on the first time.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you
And
said you wanted to do this, oh, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead, because I'm going to
yeah,
ramble.
I was just going to say, for most people, for people who lurk and don't really make themselves known and stuff like that, they're considering getting into the hobby. They're considering starting up a YouTube channel. They don't know where to start. My advice would be, um, for a lot of people, it's much easier doing a live first. Like I am a guest on your show. I didn't set up the live. I didn't have to worry about any of the technology, anything like that. You invited me. I sort of kicked you into doing it last night. You happily obliged, and here we are, having an enjoyable conversation. And I'm relaxed. You're relaxed. And the more you do the lives, the more people do lives, the less stress I think there is about sitting down, looking at the camera and only the camera, and trying not to read from a script and doing a pre-recorded YouTube post. But I would also, sorry, and I would also say that whatever it is you as a human being have to say, there is somebody out there in YouTube land waiting to hear your story.
Yeah.
Somebody out there that needs to hear your story. So don't be afraid of the technology. Don't be afraid of the nerves and the jitters. Um, do what you can in your own time to put your own face, or sorry, your own YouTube posts up. If you experience haters, you ignore the haters. Get on with yourself. You be you. The rest of us, we're going to be the rest of us. You got plenty of support in the fish fam community because the vast majority of us are pretty fucking amazing people. Yeah. And we're here to support. So at this point, Jorge, I would like to do a bit of shameless self-promotion.
Of course.
If there's anybody out there who would like to, or know somebody who might like to suffer the interview of Don the Prodigal Aquarist, my email address is prodigalaquarist, as you see it on the screen, at gmail.com. Nothing will happen straight away, but I would like to get a few names of people who would like to either just introduce themselves to the community. If they've got a channel that they'd like to promote, I'm happy to do that on mine. I don't have many followers at the moment, but hopefully in time that'll change. And other people will show up and meet you. And if we'll talk about your fish keeping hobby, your potential fish keeping hobby, your other hobbies, what specific sorts of fish you might be interested in, maybe what your local water parameters are, maybe what the guy down the local fish shop says that you should get based on what your local water supply is. And we'll find a place to start. And we won't tell you what to do, but we would all say, if I was in that situation, this is the path that I would start out with. And then you would find support all along the way. End of shameless promotion. Prodigalaquarist at gmail.com. Give me a
Yeah.
shout.
The other thing is, your YouTube channel, are you going to start posting content on that, or is that just kind of like for you to be able to participate? What's your future plans with your channel?
I don't plan on initially. I don't plan on doing live interviews. I want to do recorded interviews so that
Okay.
people have full editorial control over what gets posted out. So if I ask a question that they're not comfortable with, I can edit that bit out. Until I get the process down, when people become comfortable with me doing recorded interviews, hopefully then I will just do some pop-up lives saying, when you, Sally, can make it and I, Don, can make it, then we will do it. We'll do a live. If that doesn't suit, then I'll just carry on recording and go from there. Record and
Yeah.
publish.
Yeah, you'll find pretty quick that most people that will come on are pretty open. I've never come across a situation yet where I've asked something and the person has felt either uncomfortable answering it or refused to answer it.
Yeah.
But again, more my style is more just a conversation. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't come necessarily with a list of questions. I have some things that I'm intrigued by the person that I want to know
I
about.
did.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
did.
know.
Just in case. But
And
one of the things I said to you last night, Jorge, was if you want to ask questions about the calming effects of keeping tropical fish, of the hobby, about mental illness, about depression, I've been there with all of those things, and I'm quite happy to talk about them. I'm a human being. We're all human beings. We're all beautifully flawed beasts in our own special way. Yeah, we recognize that. We accept each
yeah,
other. We move on.
the one comment that I always find really interesting, because it's true. Some people say, the reason a lot of people have aquariums is because it generates some type of peace or tranquility, right?
Yeah.
But at the same side of that, on the other side of that token, when you're first starting out, it's totally the opposite. It's high stress.
Yes.
All this everything that you get into it and you go, where is everything that I was promised that this was going to be? But that's just because it's a learning process. It's something
Yeah, but
new.
once you
Uh,
go om, and
eh,
you learn to
so that's
relax
always
and be
funny
patient.
when people will say, "Oh yeah, it's so relaxing." Bullshit. When you're
Yeah.
first starting out, it's nothing but stress because you're worried because you're lacking the information, the knowledge. So everything is stressful. Oh, why did the fish do this? Why is why is the water looking this color? Why is, and everything is like high stress, high stress. But once you get past that learning curve, is where you learn to appreciate. Okay, I now I kind of get what they were talking about,
Yeah.
the other side of it. But I always find that so interesting when people, oh yes, aquariums are so peaceful. Yeah, it depends what stage of it you are in, because
It
they
dep it
can,
also it also it also depends on how you handle your aquarium, and
yeah,
if you insist on staying top of everything and having your hands in the tank 3 times a day, yeah, things are gonna go wrong. If you sit back and, understand what you're doing to begin with, and you trust nature to find a way, nature will find a way.
yeah, yeah. And then the other thing is also that I don't even really think it gets talked about. It does, but only the opposite side is the burnout, right? When you, especially as a content creator. But I think the reason the burnout comes about is because you personally are not being truly honest with yourself as to what you're trying to accomplish. And what do I mean by that? Um, if your goal is to become successful as a content creator, your take on how you go about doing this is going to be very different than, like, for example, I've always said I like doing this because I get to do exactly what I'm doing now. I get to connect with people, I get to interact, I get to learn a little bit about aquarium keeping and stuff like that. And that's really my goal. That's always been my goal. That's the part that I really enjoy. The having to do videos and post videos, that's the side of the coin that I kind of dread sometimes. And it's not so much the doing of the stuff, but being inspired by a topic or something that you want to do, is where sometimes I struggle with. And then the other thing is obviously the actual work, which is editing stuff. And I've gotten a little bit better, not by much, just a little bit better at being able to produce a more digestible content when it comes to doing videos.
Yeah.
But and it's not because I know I get Funk's here and he gives me a hard time about it. He goes, "Dude, you say you're not trying to do this for success or whatever." And it's not so much that, but I'm of the opinion, if I'm going to continue to do this,
Hey,
then I
Russ.
got to be able to grow. I got to
Mm,
be able to grow. My abilities have got to become better. If not, what is the point? If you're going to continue to get stuck in there. So I do try to put a little bit more effort and thought into what I'm doing. But is that really my goal? Not necessarily. But
yeah,
I do understand that you as a consumer want to have something uh, that is the word just left me, of of something that you can take away from it, something of substance. And
substance, yeah,
so that's why I don't do anything on a schedule. I don't do anything on a I did it. I tried it for a while where I was doing a live every other Saturday.
yeah,
And after about a year and a half, it really becomes taxing. And you start losing that interest in doing what it is you started out doing.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I've been of this opinion that if I happen to have success on YouTube for whatever reason, it's it's going to be based on doing it my way, the way that I instinctually feel that works for me, not following trends, not
Yeah,
doing, the thing that the experts tell you to do, because that's, at the end of the day, that's not my goal.
yeah,
My goal is to enjoy my aquariums. My goal is to sell any of the fish that I successfully breed and be able to find them, good homes for those.
yeah,
And my other goal is to um, get to meet people in the community. That's those are
exactly.
those are it.
Exactly. And getting back to my point earlier about mindful observation of the critters in your tank, I would advise people to pay attention to their own reflection in the glass, and do mindful observation of themselves. And if you're so bent on doing YouTube and social media, is it having a negative effect on you? And do you need to take a break?
Mm.
Because, like I said, we are all beautifully flawed beasts. And none of us are bulletproof like convict cichlids are. as you've proved. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes we need to step back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to take a break. It's good to
Yeah,
reset. You know, and I'm not frowning upon anybody that comes into this thinking, okay, I want to be the next king of DIY. I want to be the next Crayon Co-op, whatever you want to, whatever name you want to throw up there that you consider successful. By no means is that a, a disparaging mark towards that. It's because we're all individuals. We all have different ambitions. We all have different goals we're trying to accomplish. It's just realize that that stuff doesn't happen overnight.
yeah,
If you look at these channels that are, I guess, the the leading channels in our niche, you go back and observe that they've been at it for more than 10 years now. Every single one of those guys has been around for more than 10 years.
yeah.
And it has been a gradual, consistent increment of success that they've been able to achieve. Um, but it takes time. It's just you got to put in the work. There's no shortcuts. That's what I always tell people. There's no shortcuts. You can't. I, Even now with I know people that have tried doing stuff that YouTube sanctions as to help you grow. It it's not a shortcut. I mean,
Uh,
you could pay to have your channel viewed more. You can pay to have subscribers. You can do all these other things.
Yeah,
But
you can pay you can pay for extra impressions, but as soon as
yeah,
that runs out, what you'll find is that you get fewer impressions than you had before
yeah.
because they want you to keep paying because they think they've got you hook in the mouth.
What is so crazy, and it just kind of blows my mind, though. I thought that was only something that was happening to channels that are trying to establish themselves or trying to grow. The big channels are doing it too. That's the word. That's
Oh
the
yeah, oh
the,
yeah.
the crazy aspect of it.
Got to
And
stay on top.
yeah, but I also kind of understand it if you're running a business behind your channel. Like a lot of the successful channels that are out there nowadays, very few of them are just strictly content. And what I mean by that, they'll have an alternative product that they're trying to promote through what has become their channel. From a business point, I get it. It's cheap advertisement. It's going to, bring eyes to you. You just got to be the way you use these tools, because that's what they are, is tools. You got to be very smart about how you apply them and be understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And I so many times see where people go into this not really understanding the concept and thinking that by doing this they're automatically going to receive the success they're seeking, and it doesn't work
Awful
like
lot
that
more
because
work.
it's
It's an awful lot
yeah,
more work than that.
yeah, it's just you just got to grind it, you just got to bear it out. um you know time is the only thing that's gonna that'll eventually get you to where you need to go. And obviously you gotta work on your content. Grow, like I was saying, don't be the same channel you were day one and it's 5 years down the road and you're still
Yeah.
doing exactly what you were doing day one. That's not going to lead to success either, but it doesn't mean that you have to change drastically to be able to gain that success. No, just grow as your experience grows. Let everything that you're working on grow along with it. And
Go
and, and
go where the hobby takes you. But I mean, if you look, as you say, at these established, Johns and Jasons and stuff like that, they're running out of ideas. They're taking long form content and using apps to chop that up into shorts.
mm,
Thinking that's going to make some sort of difference. I mean, I respect both of the guys. They put an awful lot of work into what they do, and they both know an awful lot about our hobby. But it becomes obvious after a time that it becomes such a grind to them trying to come up with some unique content, a new twist on something, because there's only so many lights and so many filters and so many substrates. And yeah, they discover a couple new species of corridors every year, and we can talk about those. But then what do you do?
yeah,
You know, and you can't expect people to sit there and on a weekend afternoon watch you do water changes for 2 hours and say, well, I'm going to make an income off of people watching me do a water change on YouTube. You've got to bring more more juice than that.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing where I think it's interesting is, um, it doesn't mean that everybody has to do things exactly the same. What I mean is, you don't have to necessarily, if you want to do live streams, do something like what we're doing. That's, there's a place and a time for things like a perfect example of that would be Stephen P. His live streams are totally different than anything that I'm doing or that I see other people doing. MC Aquatics, his live streams are more of a let's hang out and we'll talk about fish if it comes up, you know. And so it there isn't also a necessarily a set mode of doing this. I
Hmm.
think a lot of it is more personality driven and what
And
you feel
that's where I
comfortable.
think the juice is. That's where I think
Yeah.
the juice is not the
Like,
fish, it's not the filters, it's not the lights, it's the people.
yeah. Tommy, the aquatic news. I see he's changed his name. That's another one, but his is not necessarily live streams, but it's just if if you can if you can find what stuff that interests you and you can tie it into your hobby,
Yeah,
that's what your channel needs to be. For me,
yeah,
my interest is I like aquariums, but I really enjoy this. This is what I really like to do
absolutely. Yeah,
is to be able to talk to somebody else that has fish. And we might not necessarily talk about fish at all the whole time we're on screen because there's so many other things that I might want to get to know about you. Or we just strictly talk about the one thing that you're doing that I'm very interested about knowing, and I want to learn how you did that. That
yeah,
conversation could go that way too. So there isn't a formula, there isn't a thing. It's just take what you enjoy and apply it to what you're doing, and
yeah,
you'll find that it doesn't become a task. It becomes something you enjoy and you look forward to doing. And that's what I've kind of done with just in general with all my channel. Uh, I knew from the get go that I wasn't going to necessarily sit there and fall into that trap of doing what was working. These trends where it's like X number of this many X number of fish you can keep in a 20-gallon, or because for one thing, there's a lot of those channels out there. So how's that going to separate me from them? And honestly, they probably do a better job of editing and putting those videos together than I will ever be able to do that. If you want to know what I think about a certain species, well, then we'll have a conversation about it. And I'll tell you
yeah,
what I've been
yeah.
able to learn about that through my experience as a fish keeper.
I got a confession to make. 2 years ago, I thought that YouTube was for nothing more than looking up old songs that you used to hear on the radio.
Yeah.
And then last year, I figured out, oh, on Sunday, I could get the highlights from Saturday's Ohio State football game because I can't get them on TV over here. And then about a year ago, my flatmate, who's got his own fish tank, and he's had in the 10 years that I've lived in his flat, he said, "Oh, you should go and look up this Father Fish guy. You should go and look up this guy and this guy because they talk about tropical fish on YouTube." And I'm like, "What? And people do that on YouTube?" A year ago, I had no idea. And now I watch a hell of a lot more YouTube than I do television. Yeah. And most of it's about
Yeah.
tropical fish. Some of it's about cooking, some of it's about gardening, some stuff, you know, random, but mostly about tropical fish, fish keeping, and stuff like that. I was just fascinated about what social media is, and I had no idea. And I come from a tech background, but that's from a mainframe automation thing, not a social media thing. Um, yeah, the world has changed so much. I don't recognize any of it, but I'm doing my best to keep up with what I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And the other thing that I would encourage people is, as much as I love um, the fish community and watching fish related stuff, that also becomes, you get to a point where you just get burned out of doing that. So follow your other passions. And the reason I say that is because recently, prior to me doing fish, one of the things that I used to spend a lot of time doing was watching some of my other just fuck laughs because I call it a hobby, but I like to smoke cigars. So that eventually got to the point where I wanted to learn more about cigars. So I started watching content about cigars. That's what and just the other day, after being away from that, once I started coming into fish, that's all I was focused on. It's just watching fish content till it was coming out of my ears. Um, and it's gotten to the point now where it's like, okay, um, I think I want to take a little step back, um, and focus on something else. So that's probably why you don't see me as often now as you do a lot of the live streams like you used to. I'd be one of those that would hop on from one live stream to another, and it's because it's like, okay, yeah, I enjoy it, I enjoy the interaction, all that stuff, but it's getting to the point where it's like it's becoming more of a task than something that I want to do. So I decided, all right, I'm going to go back to watching some of the other content stuff. What I'm trying to get at is you'll be surprised how much stuff and ideas and you can learn from going back and watching other interests that you have. Because I just saw this conversation that took place. It is like so relatable to me. A lot of what they were talking about, even though it didn't have anything to do with fish, nothing at all. They were talking about cigars, but the conversation that was being had, there was a lot of stuff in that it resonated with me because it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it, but in my hobby.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because what I started figuring out or piecing together is it's funny how as human beings we're very similar. We're only separated by our interests, but whatever does interest us, at the core of that, you're going to find a lot of similarities. The reason we enjoy those things is the same reason why we enjoy fish, why I enjoy cigars, why I enjoy doing the other things that I like to enjoy. It's at the core of a human being, what we are. There's that one thing that we're looking for, in its community.
And we're
At
all
the
cousins. We're all cousins. Every one of us are related. And
it's,
my biggest thrill, my biggest enjoyment on YouTube these days is taking part and becoming involved in live sessions. It doesn't matter if I'm up on the panel or if I'm just communicating with other people in chat and enjoying the crack. If there's not a live going, then I'll watch pre-recorded stuff, and that's great. But that's my entertainment these days, and that's what feeds my soul. Is just real people doing real stuff
yeah.
and talking about what excites them, and I just get off on that.
Well, it's crazy because when I want to take a break from all of this, I'll go watch. I'm always fascinated with people that have skills.
Yeah.
Like I'll sit there and watch a 30-minute video on a guy working on a lathe, taking this block of wood that doesn't look like anything and turning it into a final product. And not that I would ever want to do that, but just the fact that that person has that skill and knowledge to be able to see something and go, yeah, I can make a vase out of this, or I can make a bow, or whatever it is they're trying to accomplish, and to take it from that vision that I'm not seeing it and have them turn into their vision. I find stuff like that fascinating. Just or watching just guys like well, the one that I always find interesting is in the construction industry, the videos you see where the guys are laying tile or tile or they're doing roof shingles and stuff. How the ability that they've mastered that to the point where they can do it so quick that there's no way in hell I would ever be able to do it. And it's perfect every time. They've done that task for so long, for all as much that they just come a second nature for them. And to be able to, I'm always amazed by the level of skills that we can achieve as humans when we decide that we want to do something and we really put in the work.
Yeah.
And even in those things, it kind of, you take inspiration and go back, all right, so I can see that if I continue to do this, I'm going to become a little bit better and a little bit better every time. And that's part of growing. And that's what's going to keep me also coming back to do more and wanting to do more of this stuff. It's just,
Yep.
it's like anything else. The more you do it, and if you enjoy it, the better you're going to get at it. And so,
Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about, Don. we've been on here for almost an hour 40.
Yeah, that's got me quite covered, which brings to mind the fact that I've got to do a water change myself. So it's probably a good time to close this down.
All right, because I know it's late. I don't know. I've learned that you and I are an 8-hour difference, so it's got to
Yeah,
be what, almost 11 o'clock where you're at.
going on 11. Yep.
Mm. Well done. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming on, and
Yeah.
I was really looking forward to this. It's been a while. I know you had come on and had talked about doing this in the past. I think it was on somebody's thing that you popped up. I don't recall or remember whose channel, and you had kind of talked about that. And I told you you were looking for guests. I said I'll be more than happy to be one of your
Yeah. Yeah.
guests.
Yeah.
And so to finally be able to do this, I want to say thank you. And yeah, if you still want me to come on, there might be something else we can talk about, and I'll be more
It'll
than
be a
happy to
complete
oblige.
it'll be a completely different set of questions on a completely different day. I'll look a little bit older and you'll look just the same.
Yeah, no, we are getting older by the day.
All right.
Well, thank you guys. I greatly appreciate you guys coming in. I greatly appreciate Alex for those 5 gifted memberships. Jason, thank you so much for becoming a new member. And Joy of Fish Keeping, thank you so much for the super sticker. I got to get better of acknowledging these things because you guys are pulling money out of your pocket to support me, and I really appreciate that. With that being said, we'll see you guys hopefully soon. I need to call Brendan up and set up a schedule for that. Who else was I talking to? Oh, yeah, Any Fish Will Do. I've talked to him, but it's got to be after the 13th because he's got some stuff going on. So there'll be a little bit more coming on. But with that being said, thank you guys, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Good night, all. See you, Russ. Bye, Tracy. Sarah. Bye, everybody.